Keanu Reeves savored a bite of his favorite dish in the luxurious restaurant where silence and coziness reigned. He had come here to relax after a long day, enjoying the peace and solitude. However, his gaze accidentally fell on the table across from him. There sat a man who was clearly nervous. He was whispering something to himself and constantly looking around. Keanu tried to continue his dinner, but the strange behavior of his neighbor wouldn't let him relax. The man suddenly jumped up as if startled by something and hurriedly left his phone on the table. Without thinking, Keanu walked over to him, picked up the device, and said, "Hey, your phone." The man quickly turned around and grabbed it, thanking him with visible relief. His eyes were filled with anxiety, and his voice trembled. Keanu felt that something was wrong, but despite his unease, he offered to help. "What's wrong with you?" Keanu asked, noticing how lost the man seemed. I don't remember who I am," he replied in a tightening voice. When Keanu took Jake's phone, his hand nearly shook. The man stood frozen in tension, as if hiding something. His eyes, when they met Keanu's, were filled with panic, but there was also a hint of something deeper, something hidden. Not just memory loss or fear, but something far more profound. Keanu couldn't quite understand what it was. "Thank you," Jake said, nervously taking his phone. He quickly glanced at the screen, as if checking to see if he had left something important there. Keanu noticed how the man seemed to flinch slightly when his gaze fell on the screen. It was strange. He immediately returned to his corner, almost as if trying to distance himself from the world around him. "You should calm down," Keanu said gently. "Everything will be fine. Just tell me what happened." Jake remained silent. Then, as if finding the strength to speak, he said, "I don't know who I am. Everything is like a fog. I don't remember how I got here. I don't remember who I was. Am I even a person? Or is this all a dream?" Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. His instincts kicked in. He realized something was wrong. This was more than just amnesia. This was a hidden fear. But what had happened to this man? Instead of leaving, as any normal person might, Keanu offered Jake help. They made their way to the nearest hotel. All of this seemed strange, but Keanu couldn't leave a man who was clearly in distress. "You said you don't remember anything about your life, but you were someone, right?" Keanu asked as they walked down the dark streets. "Yes," Jake quietly replied. I was an agent, but that's all I remember. I remember there was a specific goal, a mission, but I don't remember what exactly. It's like someone erased part of my life." Something in his words unsettled Keanu. How could someone forget such important things? And what kind of mission was so important that Jake couldn't remember it? Keanu began to suspect that something more serious was hidden behind this. "We need to know more about what you did before," Keanu said, feeling that there was no time to waste. Jake fell silent and sat at a table, pulling out an old suitcase. Keanu noticed how his hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were folders with documents that shouldn't have been in his possession. One of them was marked with a strange symbol, resembling a security code, but with the words Operation Shadow. Keanu instantly realized this could be related to something serious. "What's this?" Keanu asked, pointing at the documents. Jake didn't answer immediately. He nervously flipped through the papers but suddenly stopped, as if something in them reminded him of something important. His expression darkened when he looked at one of the pages with coordinates and timestamps. These aren't my papers," Jake finally said, but his voice sounded weak. "I don't remember how they ended up with me, but I know this is something important." Keanu realized that this wasn't just a mistake. These documents were connected to something much bigger and more dangerous. They were supposed to contain information about some kind of operation, but why was Jake involved in such an operation? And why had his memory of it been erased? Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Jake jumped up, his eyes widening in fear. Keanu felt the tension rise immediately. He knew something was about to happen. "Who is it?" Keanu asked quietly. "It's them," Jake whispered. "They can't find me. We have to run." Jake quickly shoved the documents back into the suitcase, and they both rushed into the hallway. Keanu didn't have time to process what was happening before they found themselves in the middle of a dangerous situation. The footsteps of their pursuers grew closer. Keanu knew they couldn't stop now. They ran out through the back exit, rushed down several dark streets, and hid in an alley to escape from the people who, as it turned out, had been watching them. Once they were safe, at least for the moment, Keanu felt his heart racing, and the adrenaline still gripped him. He knew they were in far more danger now than ever before. His instincts screamed that this wasn't just a coincidence. "Jake, who are these people? Why are they chasing you?" Keanu asked, grabbing him by the shoulder. Jake stood, breathing heavily. He couldn't answer, but his eyes were filled with horror. "I don't know for sure, but I was told I had to complete a mission, and if I didn't, they wouldn't stop," Jake said, his voice full of despair. "A mission? What mission? What were you supposed to do?" Keanu pressed. "Yes," Jake quietly replied. I was an agent, but that's all I remember. I remember there was a specific goal, a mission, but I don't remember what exactly. It's like someone erased part of my life." Jake remained silent for a moment, then quietly said, "I was part of something bigger, and now I was supposed to deliver information, but I don't remember what it was about." "Everything is lost." Keanu felt his breathing grow heavier. This wasn't just a game. Jake was part of something dangerous, and now Keanu had found himself drawn into it too. But how could they get out of this? At that moment, Keanu's phone buzzed with a new message. His heart skipped a beat. The message was from an unknown number, and it contained only one word: urgent. Keanu glanced at Jake, and he realized this wasn't just a warning. He couldn't leave Jake alone now, and he couldn't ignore the message. He knew they had to act quickly. "We're going there," Keanu said, and their path into a new, even more dangerous stage of the story was just beginning. Keanu and Jake hid in a secluded corner of the city, but it was clear that their peace was only temporary. The streets of Kiev seemed to have turned against them, and even the most familiar routes had become traps. Keanu didn't know who was watching them or what kind of mission had frightened Jake so much, but he felt they were being pulled deeper into this game. They stopped at a small cafe, which looked harmless enough, but with each passing hour, the world around them became more ominous. Jake kept insisting that he didn't have all the answers, but something in his voice unsettled Keanu. It seemed like he was missing key details to fully understand what was really happening. "We need to find out who is behind this," said Keanu as they sat at a table by the window. "We can't hide forever. We need to find the source." Jake reluctantly nodded. His gaze was tense, and Keanu noticed how often he glanced around, as if expecting someone to walk into the cafe and recognize them. "You don't understand, Keanu," Jake replied. "It's much more complicated than it seems. It's not just a coincidence that I'm here. This is part of an operation we started months ago, and if I don't complete my duty, these people won't stop." Keanu looked at Jake carefully, trying to understand why he was still hiding the truth. But the question that bothered him was much simpler. What kind of operation was so important that Jake had to forget about his past? At that moment, Keanu remembered the message he had received on his phone. The coordinates they had seen in the documents were still displayed on the screen. They couldn't just ignore these numbers. It wasn't a coincidence. This was a guiding clue, possibly the key to the mystery. "We need to check this out," said Keanu. "This place could be where we find the answers." Jake looked at him with concern. He clearly wasn't sure whether going there was the right decision, but he knew they had no other choice. "Are you sure?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. "These coordinates, they're not what you think. I was supposed to be somewhere else, not here." Keanu sighed. He knew they were playing with fire, but he couldn't stop. This was too important to back down now. When they reached the location, Keanu couldn't help but feel the growing sense of anxiety creeping over him. He looked at the street, empty and ominous. It was a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, and unlike other old buildings, this one looked unassuming, but at the same time, suspiciously well protected. "Here," said Jake, pointing to a black metal door. "This should be it." The moment Keanu reached for the doorknob, tension filled the air. They were being watched. It was obvious. The door was locked and a silhouette flashed in the neighboring window. "We're not alone," Keanu whispered, pulling his hand away from the door. Suddenly, the sound of quick, confident footsteps echoed. Keanu grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him back into the shadows, trying to avoid drawing attention. "We need to find another entrance," said Keanu, his eyes scanning every movement. He could feel his heart racing, realizing that with each passing moment, the situation was becoming more dangerous. A few minutes later, they found another way in. The entrance was hidden behind an old painting hanging on the wall of the warehouse, leading into a dark room. Keanu felt the tension in the air increase. "Jake, are you sure this is the place where we'll find the answers?" Keanu asked. Jake remained silent, his face expressionless. "All I know is that I was supposed to be here," he replied, as if not even believing his own words. They entered the room. It was hard to orient themselves in the dark, but their footsteps grew louder as they moved forward. They reached the end of the hallway, where a door with a small window hung. "This is it," Jake whispered, and there was a resolve in his voice that Keanu had never heard before. When Keanu and Jake entered the room, the figure of the person in the shadows seemed not just dark. It was as if it swallowed the light, leaving only emptiness behind. Keanu couldn't make out the features of the person's face, but the voice was clear and confident. This person was not just an acquaintance of Jake's. They were someone who knew more about them than they would have liked. "Jake, you've been dragging this on for too long," he said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I knew you'd come back, but you've brought someone extra with you. Didn't think I'd notice." Keanu felt his heart skip a few beats. He knew this meeting would have consequences, but he didn't expect it to be so dangerous. He felt his muscles tense, preparing for whatever might happen next. "This isn't what you think," Jake replied, his voice still tense. "Keanu just happened to be in the right place at the right time." The man in the shadows took a step forward, and at that moment, the light from the window illuminated his face. He was older, but his eyes, full of knowledge and cold calculation, revealed no emotion. He was dangerous. "I wouldn't say it's just a coincidence," he said, his gaze sliding over Keanu. "You're not just an actor, are you? I'm sure you can be useful." Keanu felt his instincts kick in. He wasn't naive enough to believe that a random encounter could lead to such an outcome. Whoever this man was, he was clearly part of something dark and frightening. But now Keanu couldn't leave. He was already too deeply involved. Keanu had been in this game long enough to know, to survive, he had to play by the rules. But it wasn't easy. He wasn't prepared to become part of some hidden operation or power struggle. Everything about it was too dark and dangerous. "Why me?" Keanu asked, looking again into the man's eyes. "Why am I here? I'm an actor, not part of some criminal world." The man in the shadows looked at him and smiled, as if he appreciated the question. "You're an actor, yes, but you're a man who sees the truth. You see more than others, and you won't be able to leave until you uncover everything behind this operation. And now you're here, and you'll become part of it, Keanu." It was at that moment that Keanu realized he could no longer be just an observer. His life had become entangled with this world, and now he was forced to decide which side he would be on. He could try to leave, but he didn't know how deeply it would pull him in. "I'm not afraid," he said, feeling his resolve strengthen. "I won't leave until I know the truth. The man in the shadows nodded silently and opened the door. He gestured for them to follow him. "Then follow me. And don't forget, the game starts right now." The man in the shadows led them down a long corridor, the walls seeming unbearably empty. Keanu and Jake walked in silence, only their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. With every step, Keanu felt his tension rising. In this dark, ominous atmosphere, he felt as though he was at the very center of something horrific and unknown. Every sound, every glance was part of a plan that was just beginning. When they reached the door at the end of the corridor, the man in the shadows stopped and turned around. "Do you want to find the answers? Everything you want to know is hidden here," the man in the shadows said, his voice calm but so weighted that it felt as though it could determine their fate. He gestured toward a huge monitor covered with data, coordinates, and names. Keanu felt his eyes narrow with tension. It was like seeing the entire world compressed into one place. On the screen flashed images, a list of operations, people's routes, and at the center of it all, Jake's name and Keanu's name. "You can't stop now," the man in the shadows continued, stepping closer to the screen. "Everything you've seen, everything you've heard, is part of one chain. We control everything. We've decided that you will be the one to destroy this system." Keanu felt his heart begin to race. This wasn't just an investigation. This was destruction. Not just of Jake, not just of himself. This was the destruction of a system controlled by high-profile people. And now, as he stood before this choice, he realized his life no longer belonged to him. Jake stood silently beside him. He could feel his mind clouded. He was deeply involved in this process, but his memory was too unclear. What exactly was he supposed to do? Why had he been used as a pawn? His eyes reflected confusion and fear, but also concern for Keanu. "Why do you want me to be part of this?" Keanu asked, his voice firm but carrying an edge of threat. "What are you hiding? Why am I here?" The man in the shadows looked at him with a smile that was as empty as the shadow itself. "You've been part of this, Keanu. From the very beginning. Everything you've seen, everything you've heard, this was all planned in advance. We've been watching you. We've been watching every step you take, and now you can't just walk away." Keanu felt his head spin. Everything he knew turned out to be a lie. He wasn't just an actor as he thought. He was part of the game. And now his fate depended on whether he would take that final step. Jake, standing next to him, grabbed his head, his eyes wild and empty. He tried to remember what he had really forgotten, but now it seemed pointless. Everything he knew was part of this maze, and now there was no meaning in trying to escape. Keanu felt his thoughts getting tangled. He was part of this game, part of this manipulation. But what would happen to him next? What awaited him ahead? He realized that these people had manipulated him just as they had manipulated Jake. "You can't win," the man in the shadows said when he saw Keanu trying to pull away. "You can't just stop. Everything you've done has led you here. Now you must make your choice." Keanu stood, not knowing what to do. He looked at the screen where his name was highlighted in bright colors. He was at the center of this game, and his decision would not only determine his fate, but also the fate of many others. "You want to know the truth, Keanu?" the man in the shadows asked, approaching him. "You want to understand why you're here? Then you must walk this path to the end. But know this, you won't leave this alive unless you play by the rules." Jake seemed to be on the brink of collapse. Again and again, he tried to remember what had happened, but his memory wasn't providing any answers. He was deeply involved in this, and the more he tried to remember, the clearer it became. The truth he couldn't grasp was buried under layers of lies and manipulations. The man in the shadows opened one of the computers, and a map of the city appeared on the screen, with markings on important points. Keanu felt his mind stop. All these operations, all this data, Everything had been meticulously planned. "This is Operation Shadow," said the man in the shadows. "We're watching key people who know too much. We control information that changes everything. And you, Jake, were one of those who could have exposed all of this." Jake sighed, his eyes darkened as he looked at the map. "I was an agent, but I didn't know it would go this far," he said desperately, looking at Keanu. Keanu understood that they weren't just witnesses to a crime. This was a whole mechanism hidden behind many doors, where manipulation and dirty games were the norm. And Jake, whom he had thought was just suffering from memory loss, had become involved in this web. The man in the shadows stood, watching them. His gaze was sharp like a knife, and there was nothing human in his eyes. He was part of the system, part of this shadowy power. "You don't understand, Keanu," the man continued. "You were chosen because you're the one who sees the truth. It's no accident that you're here. We've been watching you. Everything you've seen, everything you've heard, led you here." Keanu stared at him silently, but in his eyes was determination. He didn't know what awaited him, but he couldn't go back. Everything he knew, he was at the epicenter of a war he knew nothing about. And now he had to decide. Would he continue to search for the truth? Or would he become part of this dark game? "You want to know the truth?" the man in the shadows continued, approaching the table with documents. "You know this isn't just a game. This is war. And you will be part of it." Keanu felt his head spin. He was already deeper than he had anticipated. Everything that was happening was now part of one huge mechanism. When Keanu opened his eyes, he found himself in a dark room surrounded by monitors and computers. He was alone. Jake was gone. Everything around him was empty. He had made his choice. Now he was part of the game,